So it's noon. Well, 12 o'clock in Portugal, 2 p.m. in Finland. Welcome to this afternoon session of Behave conference. This session is called Behavior Integration into Modeling for Policy Development. Team is already here, but well, I hope his presentation works. We are here for this session on energy modeling, which is a very important dimension of energy behaviors. It's an important tool to have. We have 6 presenters. We will begin our presentation today with Yekatherina Bobrova. I would like to remind you all that microphones should be off during sessions unless you are a speaker or a moderator. Cameras, we were asked that they also should be off, although I would like very much that they would be on, because we like to see, at least I like to see everyone's faces, but we cannot at this moment, at least. Each presenter has 10 minutes for presenting, and at the end of the session we will have around 30 minutes for questions and answers that I invite you all to write in the chat of the room. Okay, so please write your questions in the chat. So I would like to give the floor to the first presenter, which is Yekatherina. She comes from London, and she will bring us, and I'm struggling with papers, process perspective on home retrofit decisions. Yekatherina, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. Okay, my name, as mentioned, is Yekatherina. I'm going to present you today our work on process perspective on home retrofit decisions and qualitative method synthesis. This work is a part of my INESCC postdoctoral fellowship, which I'm doing at the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy at UCL in the UK. The work is co-authored with George Papachristos, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Industrial Engineering and Innovation Sciences, the TU Eindhoven, the Netherlands. So this is the outline of today's presentation. I will introduce you to the background of the research, which underpins the research aim. I will then explain the theoretical framework the analysis is based on, and talk you through the qualitative method synthesis methodology. I will then show you the findings and discuss possible policy implications. And then we'll conclude. So, why encourage energy retrofit among European homeowners? So, well, the Paris Agreement long-term temperature goal is to keep the rise in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The buildings in Europe account for 41% of the final energy consumption, 2/3 of which are for the residential building, which makes it around 1/3. And 70% of the residential stock in Europe is owner-occupied. The building sector is considered a major reservoir on energy reduction potential. For instance, the maximum energy technical reduction potential is estimated to be 53% in Sweden, 53% in Italy, and about 50% in the UK. So for these reasons, energy retrofit and owner-occupied housing sector is an important part of the effort to reduce operational energy use in dwellings and mitigate climate change. So, building research and policy has traditionally focused on the identification of retrofit drivers and barriers, with the idea to strengthen the former and reduce the latter. And numerous lists of such drivers and barriers have been produced over time. A list of drivers and barriers to retrofit, however useful, does not allow to understand the temporal sequence of various influence that operate between different stages of the process. And research has repeatedly emphasized that retrofit should be understood as dynamic processes that unfold over extended periods of time. So this work takes a process perspective on homeowner retrofit decisions to present a qualitative meta synthesis of empirical cases visible in the literature. So this figure brings together the two elements of the theoretical framework. The first element of the framework is on a vertical axis, socio-technical aspects of the built environment that shape its development pattern. The social and technical aspects of the built environment should be jointly considered to understand the interactions, as for example, the materiality of the dwelling preconfigures its energy use, while values specific to a particular social context influence the depth of technological solution achieved during the retrofit. In energy retrofit, such socio-technical interactions shape the level of retrofit depth, in pink in my figure, and the level of energy use post-retrofit also in pink. The known physical aspects of low-carbon retrofit are documented above the dotted line, and other socio-technical aspects will be discovered as the result of the meta-synthesis. So you see the same figure filled in when I show you the results. Right? So we used qualitative meta-synthesis as our literature review methodology. Qualitative meta-synthesis is a systematic approach for collection and analysis of qualitative studies with the focus of synthesizing their findings from these studies with the use of qualitative methods. Meta-synthesis is more than a summary of findings. Instead, it offers novel interpretations of findings and a possibility to construct larger narratives than in any individual study. 5 search terms were used: energy, home, retrofit, homeowner, qualitative research. These 5 key terms, together with their synonyms, formed 61 search concepts used in the search. The search recall was more than 1,500 articles, and their titles were scanned. 25 articles depicted qualitative studies on energy retrofit in single-family owner-occupied homes. In only 10 out of these 25 articles, there were cases presented in great detail, and we needed such level of detail for the application of the process lens to the analysis. These 10 articles constitute a combined sample of 94 cases, and 18 cases depicted energy retrofit in single-family owner-occupied dwellings and were also presented in great detail. So here are the overall profiles of 10 papers in the synthesis. They are exclusively European and Australian. The 3 shaded papers are based on the same sample, but that means that we saw a richer narrative. All 18 households in the selected cases comprised of at least 2 members. The dwellings were of varied construction types with the age range from 19th century to mid-1960s. Sustainability-related retrofit activities ranged from light fabric insulation measures to in-depth retrofit to passive house standards. The depth of the retrofit was judged by the first author of the synthesis. A retrofit was judged to be deep only if significant above 60% calculated or measured savings were reported in the papers. A retrofit was judged to be potentially deep and of light depth based on the combination of the technologies installed. So the sample has 3 deep retrofits, 9 potentially deep, 5 light retrofits, and 1 case in which owners eventually abandoned their retrofit intentions and bought a hybrid car to express their environmental concerns. Okay, so the analysis reveals the temporal sequence of proximate and ultimate causal influence as shown in this figure. I hope you can see the point. First, at the proximate level, the retrofit depth strongly depends on the combination of different motivation, goals, and beliefs of various actors involved in the retrofit, such as homeowners, builders, and plumbers. At the ultimate level, the technological solutions implemented during the retrofit are strongly shaped by the socio-technical realities, such as homeowner expectations, construction industry expertise, and technologies available on the market. Okay, second, on the proximate level, the actual reduction in energy use depends on the energy-related behavioral patterns of the homeowners. At the ultimate level, the degree to which the owners change their behavior post-retrofit to reduce energy use and maintain such reductions is shaped by the degree they were involved in the development of technological solutions for their retrofit. So policy implications. The first set of policy recommendations relates to the conception and realization of the deep retrofit solution. So an approximate policy suggestion is to have a project coordinator to coordinate different actors for a given retrofit who would outline a system approach to retrofit. An ultimate policy suggestion is to build expertise among the retrofit team, develop the market for low carbon technology for retrofit, but also inform homeowner expectations prior to retrofit. A promising route seems to be a proactive delivery of general and house-specific information on deep retrofit options to homeowners by local authorities. The second set of policy recommendations relates to post-retrofit behavioral change necessary to realize technological potential for carbon savings. A proximate policy suggestion is the provision of relevant information to homeowners on how to operate the installed technology. An ultimate policy suggestion is to outline pathways on how occupants, including homeowners, can be actively included in the process of design development, as the meta-synthesis highlighted that the homeowners were more likely to adapt their practices if they were involved in the creation process of a technological solution for retrofit. Maybe the insight is more related to tenants. So thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session, and if you have any specific question, you are welcome to write to me.
Thank you, Yekatherina, for your presentation. And I would like to ask Team Mandel, which is the next speaker, come forward and share his screen. Tim is bringing us a presentation called Integrating Discrete Choice Experiments and Bottom-up Energy Demand Models to investigate the long-term adoption of electric appliances in response to energy efficiency policies. Go ahead, Tim.
Thanks a lot, Marta. So it is my great pleasure to present to you today our paper. Just to begin with, to give you some background. So this paper is nested in the Horizon 2020 project CHEETAH. In a nutshell, the CHEETAH project focused on modeling the impact of energy efficiency policy design. And in particular, the project started off with the assertion that modelers typically have very little knowledge about individual households and their preferences with regards to prices, the features of different technology options, etc. Against this background, the CHEETAH project carried out a very detailed and representative survey on household energy efficiency investment behavior across the EU. And within these surveys, so-called discrete choice experiments, or DCEs, were carried out among about 18,000 participants in the EU. These discrete choice experiments were then used to model decision-making in energy simulation models. This is what I will be focusing today in my presentation. To give you like a rough overview of what we're dealing with here, imagine the following situation. Imagine that you had to pick between two refrigerators and that your previous one broke down, so you definitely need a new one. So let's assume that refrigerator A is relatively inefficient with an F label here, and then refrigerator B is slightly more efficient with a C label and with regards to the EU label. So what does the theory and empirical research say about these purchase decisions? So according to theory and what we know from research is that these decisions are very complex. So most obviously there are financial costs and benefits that play a role. So the upfront investment and the energy expenses per year. Then the characteristics of the households are quite important with regards to income, household size, attitudes, values, norms, etc. Technology characteristics are important, obviously, with regards to features, what brand is the refrigerator or whatever technology from, warranty, service. And last but not least, policies are quite significant in terms of whether there are minimum energy performance standards, whether there are labels and in what way they are designed, whether there are rebates, etc. So there's a whole range of determinants that at the end of the day set the course for which technology a consumer purchases. This not only applies to refrigerators as in this case, but also to other energy efficiency technologies, be it building renovations, heating systems, etc. However, when we look at how these very complex decision-making processes are typically modeled in energy simulation models, then we most likely are going to end up with a so-called total cost of ownership approach in one way or the other. So what is quite established in different models, including primes, for example, is this approach of measuring the total cost of ownership of one technology option based on investment, energy expenses, discount rate, lifetime, etc. And then to calculate a yearly market share, that means the percentage one technology option has in the overall sales per year. This is quite a common approach, which obviously does not take account of these complexities of these purchase decisions. Against this background, the objective of our paper and of our research was to integrate empirical findings on technology adoption behavior into bottom-up energy simulation models, and based upon that to measure the long-term effects of major EU energy efficiency policies on the adoption and corresponding final energy demand. Our starting point for this was a literature review in which we, as I just showed in the previous slide, tried to identify the empirical findings on energy efficiency adoption and its determinants. Second, we carried out comprehensive surveys in which we empirically analyzed the determining factors for technology option. These surveys were carried out in 8 EU member states. And within these surveys, as I mentioned before, so-called discrete choice experiments were carried out. Afterwards, the empirical data from the surveys was used to parameterize the investment decision-making in the bottom-up energy demand model forecast, which is dealing with the residential sector in the EU. And finally, we carried out scenario analysis to simulate the long-term adoption of white appliances, that means refrigerators, freezers, washing machines, etc., in the EU 28 in response to policy instruments. In my presentation today, I would like to focus on the survey, the model implications, and the scenario analysis. So let's have a look at the survey itself. So the core of our empirical research were these large representative household surveys. These were carried out in formerly 8, now 7 EU countries plus the UK. Data collection took place between July and August in 2018. We had a total sample of about 5,000 households in the end that we could analyze. And as I said, within these surveys, the core of these surveys were the so-called discrete choice experiments. This is a way to measure hypothetical technology adoption on the side of consumers. That means consumers are presented with various technology options to pick from that differ in terms of price, in terms of features, size, dimensions, etc. And then taking all of these data together, this allows us to come up with an overall understanding of what the major determinants are for technology adoption. Right. So just to show you a couple of key findings from these discrete choice experiments and from the survey. So what is perhaps most obvious is that the willingness to pay for higher efficiency classes, that means for example, for a triple plus labeled refrigerator is positive in all countries. That means consumers are more likely to purchase more expensive appliances if there's such a high energy efficiency label. Moreover, we found that subsidies or rebates increase the willingness to pay for high efficiency refrigerators in all countries except the UK. Though again, there's substantial heterogeneity within and across countries. Third, we found that household size, income, and environmental attitudes have an effect on evaluation of some attributes. And then finally, we also investigated the topic of energy literacy. That means to what extent are people familiar with the concept of energy savings? Do they understand what a saved kilowatt hour actually means in comparison to cost, etc.? So this was also found to play a major role. I would like to forward you to this report that is accessible on the CHITO website that is dealing with these surveys and choice experiments in more detail. What I would like to focus now is the implementation of these discrete choice experiment results in the forecast simulation model. What you can see here is a chart that depicts the modeling approach and forecast. I don't want to go too much into detail here. What is important here is that we basically manipulated how investment decisions are being made within the model. Formally, this was also a sort of total cost of ownership approach, which we here replaced by a new utility function based on some mixed logic and regression results from these surveys. This looks fairly complex, but if we break it down, what we are able to identify here, on the one hand, household characteristics that are now represented in the decision making. So these are the income levels of the households, the household size, and finally whether the household members are more or less environmentally aware. Second, we implemented different purchase attributes, of which the most important ones are the energy labeled. You can also see some lines that are striked out here on the left-hand side, including size, warranty. Star stands for the rating of the appliance. Think, for example, of the rating on Amazon, for example, for a given appliance. These were things that were basically possible to implement. However, in our case, we had some serious data restrictions, or put differently, we would need to have collected more data in terms of these attributes to really model those. But this is something for future research. And then finally, there are these weighting or regression coefficients that eventually form the utility function. The utility is then measured per technology option, and then in a subsequent step, through a logit function, is transformed into yearly market shares. Let's move forward with the scenario analysis itself. So what did we do here? Basically, we had a range, or we defined a range of 5 scenarios. First one labeled as a current policy scenario, which is basically a business as usual scenario against which the other ones can be compared. Second, we investigated the effect of rebates that are dispersed to low-income households for the most energy efficient household appliance that is available in the respective categories. So, for example, for refrigerators, this would be the A triple plus category that would receive a rebate. Third, we did the same, but instead of only dispersing the rebate to low-income households, we did so for all household groups. Fourth, we tightened the so-called minimum energy performance standards, or MAPs. So these were tightened in a way that only the 2 highest ranking energy efficiency classes available in the market were allowed for sale. And then finally, we had a best available technology scenario, which basically represents the upper bound of energy savings, or the technical potential of energy savings that is possible for the countries investigated. Let me now present to you a couple of key results from this quantitative analysis. On the left-hand side here, you can see the final energy demand of refrigerators in these 8 survey countries for the time frame 2008 to 2030. We can see that there's quite a large gap between the best available technology and the current policy scenario of about 12 percentage points, if I see that correctly, and that the rebates itself only have a minor effect on the final energy demand. The tightened minimum energy performance standards are somewhere in the middle between these extremes. On the right-hand side, what we display here is the so-called policy effectiveness. So this basically measures to what extent the different scenarios achieve the technical potential put forward by the best available technology scenario. So that means the closer we get to 100%, the closer we are at the technical potential. Here, for example, on the left-hand side for France, we can see that if we only disperse the rebate to low-income households, this will only marginally bring us closer to the technical potential. However, in contrast, when we look at, for example, Poland, the effect of rebates is much higher because consumers are more responsive to them. And accordingly, if we were to disperse rebates to all income groups, the effect would be even higher than for tightened minimum energy performance standards. So let me conclude on our modeling approach. On the pro side, the major benefits of this approach are that we have an empirical substantiation of scenario projections. That means we move away from the simplistic approach of using the total cost of ownership as a proxy for the actually complex decision-making in the household sector. Second, we're now able to represent a very diverse set of consumer groups that distinguish in terms of income levels, in terms of environmental awareness, in terms of household size. Third, of the results that I just showed are just a very small sample of the larger analysis that we carried out as part of the Cheetah project, which then shows that this approach allows for very detailed policy analysis. The limitations of this approach are as follows. The coverage of the survey countries was limited to 8 EU countries, while these represent about 75% of the formerly EU 28. There are still some country gaps that we try to fill through cluster analysis. Second, we have the problem of projecting cross-sectional survey data from a single year in 2018 to future years. Obviously, preferences are not set in stone and are something that can change as well if we look at a long-term perspective until 2030 or even 2050. So it's somewhat questionable to what extent these empirical data can even be reasonably used in a long-term view. And finally, the implementation, as I showed previously in the utility function, is incomplete with regards to the purchase attribute actually implemented. So this is something that we are currently investigating to what extent this would be feasible in future studies. This brings me to the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tim, despite the extra minutes you used. Thank you. You will have, in fact, some questions in the chat. You might want to begin reading them and answer to them. I will invite now Janos Lorincz to come forward and present and give his presentation on a systematic time-use-based approach for estimating residential energy consumption.
Good afternoon. My name is Janos Lorincz and I am a research assistant at University of Reading. And the title of my presentation is a systematic time-use-based approach for estimating residential energy consumption. So this work is part of a project called Retrofit, whose principal investigator is Professor Yekatherina. And also this short study was done in collaboration with Dr. Jose Luis Ramirez Mendiola. The project itself is funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. So in this work, we are mainly focusing on employed people time use behavior. So why work matters to us. So as you can read from the slides, from academic perspective, to understand the way institutionally timed events come to regulate, order, and organize activities into different kind of rhythms, there is a methodological perspective that aims to analyze the variation in sequences of activities taking place at times of peak electricity demand. Actually, it is defined between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. in the UK. And from policy perspective, to encourage the development of time-use policies that target specific demographic groups during specific time periods for specific events in specific geographical regions and for specific equipment use. So considering all of this, our aim was to study this energy-related behavior with time-use data and to determine if they are influenced by the consumer's time use behavior. So based on this, we define three different kind of research questions. The first is how duration and timing of the work patterns affects the cohesion between energy-related activities, how time use behavior influences residential electricity consumption, and how the connection between energy-relevant activities impact the configuration of the day. Now let's start with the short literature review. So our starting statement is that in order to investigate mechanisms for energy-saving interventions, the use of time should be considered as a key element for the study of residential energy demand. So there is already, as you can see, a large body of research suggesting that the efforts to reduce domestic energy demand needs to focus considering people's time use patterns. However, we argue that these researchers examine only a subset of time use behavior, focus on particular forms of energy, such as electricity, leaving the casual impacts of residents' time use behavior on energy consumption unexplored. What is an energy-relevant activity? Some of the previous studies that aim to understand the residential electricity consumption patterns mainly use national time use surveys. But you need to know that although these time use surveys provide information on the timings of residents' activities, activity duration, and the involvement or absence of other individuals in these kind of activities, they do not provide information on the appliance used to perform each activity. So consequently, existing research on domestic energy consumption depends mostly on separate data sets, including time use surveys, time budget surveys, household expenditure surveys, or simulated electricity data. So, and this based on this, how energy-relevant activities are created. We argue that by relying on different data sets, the energy required to power each activity cannot be accurately assessed. So this would require introduction of new dimensions that measures or that explores the time use behavior. So probably you ask me what actually is time use behavior. So we argue that the following four interconnected dimensions are used for estimating the time use behavior. This is activity sequencing, activity location, activity time and duration, activity appliance usage. They are interconnected itself. And this approach gives insight into everyday activities, characteristics, as well how actually residential energy is consumed. Let's just present these four dimensions. The first, the activity sequence dimension, indicates the order between different types of activities. Second, individuals engage in these activities in different locations, such as home, workplace, or on the bus. This is what defines the activity location. Due to the limited amount of time available, the duration and the timing of activities differ as well. A longer amount of time spent on work-related tasks allows less time for other type of leisure-related activity. In their daily life, individuals use different appliances to facilitate their daily activities, and this is the activity appliance usage dimension. As a result, we suggest that domestic electricity consumption is directly connected with the sequences of activities, activity location, time of operation, and appliances used in activities, which define this kind of dimensions of time use behavior. And based on this, we wanted to study this. So, as you can see, our initial approach was the time use diaries, which is the most recent time use diary from United Kingdom, 2014-2015, as well the work-long week diaries in which people recorded their different kind of work schedules. The time use diaries and the work-long diaries were filled in together. So basically, you had to provide at the same day a work-long week diary, a work-day long diary, as well a time use diary. So the second stage was identifying these various work patterns that occurs on a weekly basis. The third step was dividing the sample into two categories based on the weekly duration of the works. So in this case, we divided the sample into those who reported working more than 35 hours during the week and those who worked less than 35 hours during the week. So in those who are reported working less than 35 hours per week are students, parents, retired people, and other part-time workers. But also there are a number of workers who hold 2 or more part-time jobs. In the other group, mainly we have lone and couples with more than 1 child and other full-time workers. So the main decision was based on the UK government contracts and employment working hours document definition. However, it's not so clear in the UK what actually means part-time, how many hours part-time workers needs to work. We divided the day into 6 separate daily time periods that allows to consider the time use behavior along all the day. So this followed matching the time use diaries that were completed during the workday. Then we identify these energy relevant activities. We are using 6 energy relevant activities mainly based on the Richardson-Kress model approach. And based on this, after this, we measured and visualized the location, timing, and duration, and sequencing and appliance usage of energy relevant activities, and try to investigate if there is any causal relationship between time use behavior and residential energy consumption. So before we jump into the results, I just need to tell you what kind of work patterns they are. In this presentation, I'm mainly focusing on the consecutive work days. So this means that there is no gap between the work days. So you can see the week starts on Saturday, and people who started their work on Saturday, they will end their work schedule on Saturday. Then those who started their work on Sunday and who work 6 work days, they will end their work schedule on Friday, and so on. So the most important thing is that there are no gaps between the days. And also in the case of the sequencing, what actually we try to do to introduce the between the centrality measures. All our abstract is around the sequence measures and metrics. So I will be very short on this. So basically between the centrality is a widely used measure that captures a person's role in allowing information to pass from one part of the network to another. So in this case, it is used to identify energy relevant activities who play a bridge spanning role in a sequence. Okay, moving forward, results. So this is activity location. So like what actually you can see this on this tempogram, it shows the proportion of active people that actually work according to the weekly work diaries at any given moment during the week. So for instance, the red line will suggest that the proportion of people working during the week at different time steps, and the purple one, and the purple one will show that those people who reported working 7 continuous days during the week. So the majority of people work during the day. There are still some significant proportions of people working the early morning and also during the evening and during the night. Timing of work, of course, is very crucial, as working on evening shift is likely to have some different implications for social life on different days of the week. Furthermore, what actually we can observe that the work activity reaches a peak at 10:30, and mainly in this case of those who reported working 2, 3, or 4 consecutive days, and the highest peak is afternoon around 2 p.m. And this is the case after which the lines we can observe declines progressively. Also, we can observe some overlapping time spent after 6 p.m. So 6 p.m. Yes. On the next slides, what actually we have the activity location of those who reported working more than 35 hours per week. So it is suggested that that it's a fragmented workday, as you can see. This is categorized by 2 short work spans in the morning, a long break between them, and progressive work in the evening. So there is less variation between the types of work patterns, suggesting that work is not randomly scheduled over the week, but instead is highly temporally structured in December. And in this case, the highest number of people at work is recorded at 11:30, and the afternoon peak occurs around 3:45 p.m. Now, in the case of the activity duration, we try to represent the differences in the mean duration of engagement in the energy relevant activities. So in this case, each point, as you can see, represent a time period reflecting the mean time in minutes associated with the mean time spent in energy relevant activities. Using this type of visualization, we can explore how different types of energy relevant activities relate to changes in the times during the day. For example, as you can see, the mean duration of time spent in television watching behavior is highest in the case of those who reported working 7 consecutive work days, and this occurs and is the lowest during the night. The mean duration also reveals how often workers...
Mate, I apologize to interrupt. We need you to conclude. You are already over time. Thank you.
Okay, so basically, what actually we can observe based on different kind of measures that the two different kind of patterns, they differ. And also we could refer, using the activity timing, we can observe there are some fixed activities that in the both sample they start at the same time. Moreover, what we can observe that some energy relevant activities have the same common most starting time. The betweenness measures help us to see which kind of energy relevant activities connect, which are important during the day. And so, like, just to conclude, so basically this is the time use behavior. So what actually it is suggested by this plot is that in the case of those who reported working at least 35 hours, it shows that individuals used the TV to perform their mass media activity. This will be the TV. During 4 till 750 time period, it consumed approximately 0.103 kilowatt of electricity. And of course, this could be influenced by different kind of policy measures. I will argue, hence, from policy making viewpoint, if we want to reduce this part of energy consumption, we can instruct the individuals to perform the mass media activity later or earlier, or to shorten the mass media activity time. This is the duration dimension, or to increase the electricity price during this period. This would be the timing dimension, or to promote more energy efficient appliances. So in short, what we suggest that from academic perspective, the causal effect between time use behavior and residential energy consumption may be influenced by employment status. From methodological perspective, our framework provides a structure for addressing the causal relationship between time use behavior and residential energy consumption. And finally, from policy perspective, what we argue that the development of policies that include the 4 dimensions of time use behavior would allow policymakers to target specific groups of residential population and steer their behaviors in order to achieve energy savings. Apologies, Marta, for
Thank you, Mate, for this last effort to get time. Thank you. But interesting results. Let's have time to discuss them in the end. So let's proceed to the next presenter, Giulia Chersoni. Apologies for not pronouncing it properly.
Don't worry.
Marta, you need to unshare.
Yes, I'm just trying now. Yeah.
Or Giulia can. Okay, thank you. And Giulia is bringing us an agent-based.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, I'm going to present an agent-based model of retrofit adoption. This is the third paper of my PhD project, work in conjunction with my supervisor, Magda Fontana from the University of Turin, and Nives della Valle, that used to work with me at Europe Research and now joined the JRC at ISPRA. So like the paper in a nutshell, given that I have just 10 minutes to give you like a broad overview, we developed an agent-based model to try to take into account not just the economic, so the financial aspects related to the investment in thermal insulation, but also the behavioral and social factors. And we use this model to simulate some effects, some policy schemes on the adoption rate. We calibrate the model using survey data from 2015. I will talk you more about the data later. And we simulate 2 types of policy intervention, like a policies that try to increase the awareness related to environmental problem and more, let's say, normal financial incentives, and the results suggest that the leveraging environmental protection in isolation is not that effective, while financial incentives that target low income households are much more effective. So just like I thought that this slide maybe could give you, we all know what we are talking about, why energy efficiency is important, especially if we look at what are the energy efficiency targets set by the European Commission. And these figures are from 2019. So we had like another time to reach the 2020 target that we didn't reach. And but we have a lot of work to do to reach the 2030 target. And of course, the figure shows the final energy consumption at the aggregate level. So it's not just the households level that I'm the one that we are concentrating on, but also the industry and agriculture. But still, we need to put a lot of effort, especially from like a policy perspective, to reach the European set target. And as you know, a new strategy launched by the European Commission, the renovation wave, has been launched. And from the point of the work is to try to understand why, what can we leverage to achieve those these targets. And we start from the observation that classical economic models normally takes into account just the economic perspective. And those type of modeling has proved to have limitation for the effectiveness, for the usefulness for policymakers due to the assumption they are based on. They are mainly that we act as perfect rational agent. We are homogeneous in our characteristics, and there's no interaction that kind of affects our behavior. So we start from, we kind of bring also the behavioral literature that kind of highlights the role of behavioral heterogeneity into the adoption process of energy efficiency technology, and in the innovation diffusion literature, in which the role of social influence is highlighted. And so the contribution of this work is twofold. For like a modern perspective, we kind of merge the economic, behavioral, and social motivation that affects household decision to invest in energy renovation. And we use this model to try to integrate the role of economic and behavioral heterogeneity and the effect of the nonlinear interaction within households for policy development. And this is a brief overview of the model. I won't delve into details, but basically we start. We bring the Benabuenti-Roll behavioral economic model into an agent-based model, and we merge into with an epidemic diffusion model. So basically, what the adoption rules into the model is like the sum of two components, the EB and the N component. And the EB component is basically the difference between the behavioral factors that affect the choice to invest in energy renovation, that for us is the degree of environmental concern, and the economic factors, so the upfront cost of the technology. And so we retain exactly the structure of the Benabuenti-Roll model, while to model the N parts, so the social factors, this is how standard epidemic models are set. And so we basically have that the adoption probability increase as much as of your neighborhood already have adopted. And we take into account also the parameter QI. There is a kind of represent the imitation effect, so the willingness to imitate the behavior of the others, and also rely on a Benabuenti-Roll work. This is assumed to be inversely proportional to the level of environmental concern of each household. And we use the beta factor to weight the two components, so the EB, the personal, and the social component. We use data from the second market study of the functioning of the retail electricity market that basically grab information on households. We have around 29,000 observations from Europe, from different European countries. And as you can see in the figures, here we have the adoption rate of thermal insulation. That is the technology we are focusing on into the model, into the paper. And the social demographic and attitudinal information that we use to calibrate the model are basically two. So the incomes, households' financial situation that we use as a proxy for income of the households, and the level of environmental concern. There is the Likert scale variable that stems from the question that you see in quote. So it is important for me to save energy for environmental reasons. And so that range from 0, so totally disagree, to 10, totally agree. So we use these two distribution. We normalize these two distribution to parameterize DI and CI variable into the model. So we normalize the distribution and we use the financial situation, so the proxy for income, to calculate the CI, that is the normalized ratio between the agency income and the technology costs. So of course, higher is CI, higher will be the burden, the financial burden for the households to invest. And we assume on that side that those households that are low-income households cannot support the financial burden of the investment, so they will never adopt. While the parameter VI is the normalization of the distribution that I showed you before, and is the environmental concern level of each households. And of course, higher the environmental concern, higher the probability to invest. And we assume here that those that are low environmentally concerned won't adopt but they might be influenced by the behavior of their neighbors. So as increase the percentage of their neighbors that have already adopted, they will be able to adopt too. And as said at the beginning, we don't have observation from the social structure behind the adoption process. And so here we simulate different network structure, preferential attachment and small word structure, namely. And we use this baseline model due to time constraint. I didn't have the chance to show you some robustness check on the model, but I decided to focus more on the policy simulation itself. And so, as said at the beginning, we simulate two types of policies. One promoting the environmental concern, and here we have we compare the effectiveness of a mass campaign to increase environmental awareness for the whole population versus a targeted norm-based intervention where the role of a trusted messenger is used to increase the share of pro-environmental norms at the population level. From the financial incentives that we simulate is a rebate, 100% rebate on the investment cost, like, for example, the eco bonus that we have now in Italy. And here we compare the effect of this type of policy if randomly assigned to the population or if targeted to low-income houses. And looking at the results of the the pro-environmental awareness campaign, we have as you can see from the graph, the dotted line is the results, the adoption rate, the results after the mass campaign is implemented. And here we see that this type of policy has an intended effect on those who have already are environmentally concerned. And here the explanation could be that this type of policy, so the one size fit for all intervention, might be constrained by individual heterogeneity because it does not take into account that we might react differently from the same type of incentives. While on the other hand, the norm-based intervention seems not to have a really high increase in the adoption rate compared to the baseline model, so the one without the policy intervention. On average, we have like a 1% increase in the adoption rate in both type of network structures. And here the point is that those type of interventions are effective at promoting adoption at the community level, but are not effective at promoting adoption at the population level. So here we can think to complement those types of intervention with some intervention that might develop a collective identity to increase the adoption rate at the population level. While looking at the results for the financial incentives, we do see from the figures that the dot-dashed lines, that is the targeted intervention to low-income households, is much more effective in promoting the adoption compared to the randomly assigned rebate. And here, it is important to state that when designing financial incentives, it's important to account also for justice concern. And this could have the win-win situation of increasing energy efficiency, but also tackling the energy poverty vulnerability problem. And at the same time, designing this type of intervention in this way could also prevent the free riding effect for those that would have already adopted, even in the absence of the incentives itself. So to conclude, we start from the evidence that there exists an energy efficiency gap, so a gap between the optimal investment in energy efficiency and what we observe. And we use the behavioral economics and the innovation diffusion theory to bring into the discourse not just the economics component, but also the heterogeneity in the behavioral components, so the intrinsic motivation that drives the adoption, and also the social structure, so the interaction that may affect your choice. And we combine this theory, these two approach into an agent-based model that we use to simulate two different types of intervention. And as a conclusion from the results of the policy incentives itself, what we can say is probably that a combination of behavior informed and more traditional type of intervention but be more effective in promoting adoption. So I conclude here, hope to be in time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia. I will ask now the next speaker, Enni Ruokamo, to come forward and share the screen. Enni, she's bringing us the effect of information nudges on energy saving, observations from a randomized field experiment in Finland. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Enni Ruokamo, and I work as a researcher at the Finnish Environment Institute, and I'm pleased to be here to tell you about our research that focuses on studying the effects of information nudges on households and energy-saving behavior. Okay, so in our study, our aim was to examine whether energy-saving tips is able to reduce households' electricity consumption, as well as we were interested whether peer comparisons provided through this online energy service platform is able to induce household electricity savings. We studied the effectiveness of these nudges with a randomized field experiment that guarantees a trustworthy way to assess the effectiveness of these studied nudges. In this field experiment, we divided the targeted households randomly to those who received information nudges and those who didn't. The information in this experiment was administered via monthly email newsletters when we think about these energy-saving tips. And this peer comparison tool was provided to the participant in this online energy service platform. Our study area is located in Finland, this municipality close to Helsinki called Porvoo. Generally, the literature on households' energy usage behavior is actually quite rich, and there are also many randomized field experiments conducted on the topic around the world. A general finding in these experiments is that this kind of information nudges can actually induce electricity savings among households. But still, for example, the evidence on the impacts of this kind of general energy saving tips is mixed. So how effective these general energy saving tips are. We also lack knowledge on the topic in countries where there are really high seasonal variation in the outer temperatures and also those in the energy consumption. For example, in Finland, there is no randomized field experiments conducted on the effectiveness of information nudges on households and energy usage. This study also allows us for analyzing the effect of these information nudges between the users and non-users of these online energy service platforms, where people can follow their daily electricity consumption. These kind of services are available for all Finnish households that have electricity contract. Then a few words about the experiment design. So these kind of experiments would have not been possible without collaboration. The local electricity distributor Porvoon Energia, Finnish Energy Authority, as well as sustainable development company Motiva were the key partners with our BCDC energy research team in conducting this experiment. The execution phase of this experiment started in summer 2018 when we recruited the participants to our experiment with a survey. We were able to recruit around 670 households to the experiment. Then the experiment itself, so the information steering started in October of 2018 and lasted for 1 year onwards. We also collected feedback from the experiment participants with surveys and phone interviews. The Porvoon Energia, the local distribution company, provided us the hourly electricity consumption data of the participant households. In the experiment, the actual division to treated and non-treated households was organized in the following way. First, we divided the recruited participants to users and non-users of this online electricity service platform provided by the distribution company. One of the main reasons for this division was that the delivery mode of the peer comparisons was organized via this online platform that was provided by the distributor. After this division to registered and non-registered households, we then randomized the households to those receiving information nudges and to those who did not receive any information nudges. So they were worked as the control groups. The energy saving tip nudge was tested within both the registered and unregistered groups. So the households belonging to tip R and tip NR groups received monthly email newsletters with very versatile energy saving information content. Then the norm R group had access in the online platform to this kind of peer comparison tool where they could compare their own electricity consumption to other similar households' electricity consumption. This group also received monthly email newsletters in which we tried to encourage them to use the peer comparison tool, and there was also this kind of reduced energy saving tip content compared to the other groups who received much more energy saving tips than this group. So then to the results, because the time is limited. So did the energy saving tips and peer comparisons actually reduce the experiment participants' electricity consumption? to study this, we utilize differences in differences regression to estimate the effects of the information treatments, the information nudges that I just explained. And when looking at the results at the year level, we observe no statistically significant treatment effects among the treated households over the 1-year experiment period. These results, they are very robust to different treatments of control variables. And as we observed no effects, we started to think whether there would be some differences between seasons and months, because there is quite big kind of a variation also in the electricity consumption due to this high seasonal variation in outdoor temperature in Finland. We also made these monthly estimations, and then the data started to speak. When we look at the monthly results of this registered group that received these versatile energy saving tips via email newsletters, we observe statistically significant reduction in electricity consumption within the first 5 months of the experiment. During this time, the reduction in electricity consumption varied between 8 and 12%. Then when the spring and summer arrived, we observe either no effects or even slight increases in the electricity consumption. Then again, in the end of the experiment in November, when the winter again arrives, we observe a significant reduction in households' electricity consumption. The average reductions in daily electricity consumption vary between a decrease of around 6.5 kilowatt hours in January and increase of 1.8 kilowatt hours in August. When looking at the results of the group who were able to do the peer comparisons, we observe no effects during the first 11 months of the experiments. However, in the end of the experiment, we observe a significant reduction in the electricity consumption. This kind of a late and desired response to our information nudge can be explained by at least 2 reasons. We know that the activity to actually use the peer comparison tool in the online platform was quite low throughout the experiment. The login data reveals that around 40% of the households did not use the service at all, even though they had possibility to use it. Moreover, this norm group was provided simpler, not that versatile energy saving tips until the fall of 2019. So we added energy saving tips also for this group, and then in November we observed also reductions in electricity usage among these individuals. When looking at the group of non-registered households who did not use this online, so to kind of conclude, it was quite hard to try to activate the non-registered households during the experiment. However, the people who were already in the beginning the users of these online energy service platforms were quite responsive to our information nudges, and they decreased their electricity consumption in wintertime between 8 and 12%. We also have some really weak evidence that the social norm combined, these kind of peer comparisons combined with detailed energy saving tips may decrease electricity consumption. However, it was quite challenging. Maybe the kind of the way how the peer comparisons were organized through this online platform wasn't working in a best way. And to conclude, also a few recommendations for the energy advice. So we learned from our experiment that timing as well as content matter. So this kind of a high consumption season and also detailed and tailored energy saving tips, they increase the effectiveness of given monthly energy advice. We also noticed that targeting was important. So not that surprisingly, especially those people who were more interested in energy issues, they responded really well to the treatment during winter time. We also observed during the experiment that email worked actually quite well to deliver these newsletters containing energy saving tips. People said that they liked this delivery method, our participants, and also it's very cost efficient way to reach individuals. So thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Enni, and apologies for this technical issue that we had. We now will proceed to the next presentation with Giulia and Farzan. I would like to say, while they share the screen, that we are a bit delayed, which means that probably we won't have time for oral discussions. I invite everyone to put their questions on the chat. I ask authors to please keep answering all the questions that are written in the chat. So thank you all, and I give the floor to Giulia.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon.
We are seeing your screen. Go ahead.
Perfect. My name is Giulia, and me and my colleague Farzan, who you can see also, will present you the study on the spectrum of residential cooling demand. So we compare computer simulation, cooling demand, and residents' real-life needs. So, well, yeah, the question is, who defines the cooling demand? Is it the building or is it the residents? As you all may know, the building standards usually define certain temperature thresholds, which define cooling demand and overheating. And usually the residents' feelings or perceived thermal comfort are not taken into account. And we set up a mixed method study in Munich, in Germany, where we wanted to compare the computer simulation of cooling demand and heat stress with temperature measurements in different apartments and households, and the people's own perception of heat in their indoor environment. And we conducted a large household survey among more than 700 participants all over the city. And as you can see, they comprise different building structures, social groups, and also microclimates that are on the map. And more than 340 of those households also volunteered to measure the temperatures in their bedrooms for 2 months. During August 2020, so from July till September last year, and we matched the survey data, their answers and their perception to these temperature measurements. And we created 2 heat stress indices, one subjective heat stress index and the cooling demand, and the second, the objective heat stress index based on the temperature measurements with those data loggers that you can see here on the left.
So thank you, Giulia. In order to compute the cooling demand, we performed an urban energy simulation with UMI. UMI stands for Urban Modeling Interface, which is developed by the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and bases on the energy plus building energy simulation. On the right side, you can see the simulated city district in UMI, and the investigated buildings are highlighted in different colors. The UMI simulations are based on 3D city models. We got CityGML data from the city of Munich, which also included the building age classes. The boundary of the simulations were, for instance, the weather data, which is the test reference year for Munich. The building geometries come directly from the CityGML data. And the materials and windows that we assign to the simulations are based on the building age classes of these different buildings. And different simulation boundaries like the air exchange rate are based on the assumptions and standards from the German norms. And we also included the effect of shadings of the surrounding buildings. As you can see, all the buildings in that district were included. So we could also simulate the shading by the surrounding buildings. The threshold for calculating the overheating hours and the cooling demand is defined by the German standard for Munich, which is 26 degrees. And the overheating hours simply mean the amount of hours that are above this threshold of 26 degrees. So on one side, we have our urban energy simulation, which was performed with UMI, which included the different building characteristic and also the simplified user behavior based on the norms and standards and the test reference here weather data. And in the middle, we have the logger data, which was divided into different apartments that we investigated. And through these loggers, we also considered, for instance, the apartment characteristics, the user behavior, the actual one, and the neighborhood context. And at the end, we have our survey data, in which many different questions were surveyed. And that includes also, for instance, individual characteristics like the thermal preference, the health, the age, and different psychological aspects and social context.
Yeah, thank you, Farzan. To the results, we were quite disappointed and surprised at first when we saw that in the first exploratory analysis, there were no significant correlations between the computer modeled overheating and cooling demand. And the measurements, the temperature measurements, or the perceived heat exposure. So there were no significant correlations, and we were asking why. So let's have a look at one example. Here you can see the computer simulation results, the modeled overheating hours and cooling demand of one building, for example, in the red circle, and those are quite low. So this means that the building is usually not very prone to overheating. And when comparing this to the temperature measurements, we see that they are also quite low. And from the survey, we know that it's a 2-room apartment on the 4th floor, but has a Western orientation. And there is no heat protection available, so no shutters, no air conditioning, no awnings, only curtains. And the person who lives there also uses an automatic fan and practices cross ventilation at night. So this might contribute to the low temperatures. But if we compare this now to the perceived heat stress and cooling demand of the person, we see that it's quite high. So this is due to the individual characteristics and satisfaction. We know from the survey that it's a 59-year-old lady who lives there, and she's not at all satisfied with her apartment, nor with the neighborhood, nor with her control over the thermal environment. And she has poor health also, and she really likes to have air conditioning and shutters. So we see how the level of control and thermal preferences contribute or create a cooling demand, a personal cooling demand, where neither the temperature measurements nor the simulation would have predicted this. So, and to sum it up, yeah, well, the devil is in the details, as most of the time. We have found 2 main reasons why there is no strong correlation between those measurements and survey results and the computer model. One is that the indoor temperatures here, they are mostly or most strongly influenced by the apartment characteristics and not the building characteristics. And second, the subjective cooling demand and perceived heat stress is mostly and most strongly influenced by the level of control and satisfaction of control, and also individual thermal preferences, for example. And all those are not taken into account by the computer simulation model. So this explains why, but on the other hand, this leaves us with the question, what is the computer simulation and cooling demand that is usually used actually useful, or do we need something different? So yeah, thank you for your questions, or maybe in the chat.
Thank you, Giulia and Farzan. You didn't use all the time, so you have 2 minutes left. And so since you are the last presenters and discussion has been ongoing, very rich in the chat, I would like to ask everyone to put some questions to the last presenters, to Giulia and Farzan. Don't know if anyone has questions for them. If no one comes forward, I will ask you something. Modeling, as you know, and it's the title of the session, is important also for policy development. Based on your results, what would be your main advices to, I think, Munich municipality or those organizations that are leading or in charge of energy efficiency in buildings in Germany, which I believe it is your main study area.
Farzan, do you want to answer? Well, I'll just answer. In my opinion, the advice, the most important one would be that don't rely on computer simulations only. Maybe this is the most basic advice, but then we really found that, in Munich, for example, or in the whole of Germany, air conditioning is not very widespread. So that means cooling demand and energy demand really depends on if people have air conditioning at home or not how much they use it. And people really want air conditioning at home only if they feel exposed to heat. And this really does not depend on the building characteristics, on the microclimate, and it doesn't really depend on the apartment and the temperatures itself. It mostly depends on the satisfaction with control. And we can really enhance these satisfaction levels if we provide people with more options, like shutters, for example, outdoor shutters and other possibilities, also balconies and stuff like that, that really helps support their feelings of control and saves energy.
And I just wanted to add, because we all know there is always a gap between the reality and what is simulated, and one of the most or major influences the occupant behavior. And for integrating the occupant behavior in such a simulation, a bottom-up approach like using data loggers or better sensory devices for considering the thermal comfort and occupant behavior should be considered in future studies, and it could be also suggested to the city or municipalities.
So combining more engineering tools with more social and humanities tools, it's your advice. It's also mine. So thank you for reinforcing that. Any further questions to any speaker? Please, you have the floor and the camera if you want. Have all questions in the chat been answered? Or has anyone wrote a question that hasn't yet been answered? I've been trying to following the chat, but questions and answers have been too many. So if no one else has questions, I would like to thank you, all of you that came to this session. I would like to thank speakers in particular for presenting fantastic work on energy modeling and behavior modeling, for showing us a very, and you can turn your cameras on, please, so we can all see you. Thank you. Thank you for bringing us important, relevant, interesting research on behavior integration into energy modeling. Thank you for bringing your results. At least I look forward for your next results, for the evolution of your work. And thank you all participants for being in the session. And now we have a coffee break, I think. I will have a lunch break now because I'm in Portugal, in Coimbra. Look forward to meet you in person all in the next opportunity we have without pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you.